Now we're looking at creation evidences just to make sure we all know what we're looking at. There's a whole scope of evidences that support Christianity. That there is a God, that Jesus is the Son of God, that the Bible is His Word. We're zeroing in on just a real narrow band here. In fact, I actually prefer the evidences that come from within the Scriptures and the way that we can look and see how we can trust that as being God's Word. And maybe no promises that it's going to happen after this class, but maybe we'll look into that sometime in the future. I'm sure we will at some time, and look at the various evidences for the inspiration of the Bible, and therefore, if we can trust that the Bible is inspired, then we know that what it says is true. And if it says Jesus is the Son of God, we know that is true. So, but at this time, we're looking at more of this narrow band of evidences, which has to do with being able to make the only rational conclusion possible by the things that we see, the things that are made. So we look around us and see all the vast wonder in life on this planet, and the life that's sitting in this room, the people that are here. We can only come up with one conclusion that makes any sense, and that is that God created it. We spent some time, about 7 weeks, looking at why we can't trust evolution as being the answer. There's no way that a slow process like that and the process that its use of mutation and random selection could ever come up with what we see in the vast, wonderful, amazing life that's all around us. This verse in Genesis 1:24, this is the truth of the matter. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. This last week we started looking at the little section here of God's wonderful creatures that He's made, and looking and seeing that just by some of the things we see in these different creatures, that God must have been the one that designed them and made them, because they couldn't come about by accident. And the reason we know that is because we see the design that exists in them. We see the order. We see the functional processes that are all involved. It couldn't be accidental. We see some of the purpose that's there. The complexity of some of these creatures and the different various mechanisms, biological mechanisms that are within them, can only be explained by someone who designed them and made them. In fact, they're so complex, we're looking at this term irreducible complexity, and we're looking at this little illustration is giving us an example of why we have to conclude there must be a creator. Evolution could not explain how something like a mousetrap, let's say it was a biological mousetrap, could come about. There's a number of parts involved. Evolution is a slow process that only works at one or two things at a time, not necessarily related. And a mousetrap has to have all the pieces together at once to work at all, to function, to fulfill its purpose of trapping that mouse. Any one of these things that come together slowly over hundreds of thousands of years wouldn't produce anything that would function and wouldn't be something that would be preserved by what evolutionists call natural selection. So that's the same truth, and we're going to see this little mousetrap coming up all the time as sort of here's the deal, irreducible complexity. It's so complex, all these pieces had to be here to make it work. And that's the same thing that is true about living creatures. We're too complicated. We couldn't fall together by accident. I don't care how long a time you've got. We were designed and we were made. We see that with the eye, as we took time to look at that, or with the ear, or with the blood clotting mechanism, or with this, one of the very sophisticated parts of our immune system, the antibiotic system that has a number of complicated interrelated processes. They all are necessary for this antibiotic immune system to work properly. And so coming about at a step at a time, slowly over many, many, many years, isn't going to get you what you need. This thing had to be working and functioning in its complicated way from the start for it to do any good at all. And so we've got to agree, and we've got to be willing to say, I will praise thee, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knows very well. It is so obvious that God says that it's the fool that says in his heart there is no God. Not Bill saying that. No one of you invented that. God revealed that particular verse. The fool says in his heart. The person who is irrational, unreasonable, and will not look at the facts honestly says in their heart there is no God. Those who look at it rationally and honestly see the marvelous works that God has made, and we know it very well. Okay, we're just, of course, as most of you know, I review for a couple of minutes before we get off into new material, and that's what we're doing. But we got in last week to creatures of design and saw some of, and notice this one quotation by Darwin, which I love. I can just about read this one every week. We looked at it last week, but let's read it again. He says, I remember well the time when the thought of the eye made me cold all over. But I have got over this stage of complaint, and now trifling particulars of structure often make me very uncomfortable. The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail, whenever I gaze at it, makes me sick. So when he looked at this creature, it wasn't he didn't think it was beautiful. It was the fact that he couldn't figure out how his system of slow, random change and selection could produce it. He just didn't understand that, but he still followed that system. He should have made the conclusion that Psalm 104 and verse 24 brings to our attention. And that is in Psalm 104, O Lord, how many are your works? In wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures, and they're amazing creatures. Last week, we looked at this particular fella, the bombardier beetle. He's a neat little guy. I don't care if you like bugs or not. He's really cool. He really is. And we looked at that this guy defends itself by shooting predators, things like ants and frogs and spiders, with a high-pressure jet of boiling liquid in a rapid fire action called pulse combustion. And this happens with a complicated mechanism that we looked at. Took a little time to go in there and saw there were at least 4 different complicated chemicals that were needed. Some of the most complicated enzymes that had to be catalysts to make this thing work properly. And not only that, but it had to be stored until it was ready. Can't be just produced when needed, had to be stored. There's a bit of storage tank there and a proper kind of a reaction chamber for this explosions to happen. It's just amazing. It's wonderful. And we can see because of the intricacies of this particular creature, it couldn't have evolved slowly over time. One system coming in, let's say the catalyst evolved first slowly. Let's just say that happened. Catalyst for what? We don't even have the hydrocortisone or any of the other elements yet. It's not going to be any good. And if you did get those chemicals together and it was lit off, it'd blow the bug up without the proper reaction chamber. So I mean, any way you look at it, you've got to see an animal like this was designed, had to be made. It's too complex, too amazing to happen by accident. Okay, that's where we left off last week. It usually take about 5 minutes to review. Any comments up to here? I do appreciate everyone's comments and questions and the things you add during the class, and so I appreciate that. Mike?
If you look at the actual design of that beetle's spray mechanism, it's like a rocket engine.
Yeah.
And not only that, but it's like a highly controlled rocket engine, because it, like you said, if it just had one big blast, it would blow the beetle away, you know, it would propel the beetle off of his feet. So
yeah.
It has to be controlled, you know, like little retro rocket blasts to make it effective. And you're going, okay, rocket engines didn't happen by accident.
No.
So here's something that's naturally occurring, and that wasn't by accident either.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's too complicated to work on a slow process like evolution. Okay, next little creature. And no, I don't have a thing for bugs, but here's a cyanide millipede. This guy's an amazing little guy. Yeah, he's got cyanide. One would think that a cyanide-producing millipedes would be killed by their own poison, wouldn't you? He produces a cyanide that's tremendously toxic. Now just imagine that evolving in his system somehow, some way, very complicated system would have to be. First time it produced, he'd die from it. He would. There's no natural immunity to cyanide. But located within the sides of each segment of this type of millipede are small chambers that produce a deadly cyanide liquid. You can almost see them in this picture, but you have to get closer. If you want to go online, you can look a little closer, but there's little little beads of cyanide right up here, little drops along his legs that he produces. The poison is activated when the millipede is threatened and forms little droplets along the millipede's side. The cyanide is strong enough to make most predators seriously ill if they touch the millipede, and it's strong enough to kill many small predators if they eat them. So they don't eat them. But even touching him, bothering him, can cause reactions within different animals. The millipede, here's how he can resist it, has a special complex mitochondria. That's not the last time we'll hear that term, but all it means is a cellular mechanism that renders it absolutely immune to the poison. He's got a sophisticated biological mechanism that allows him to be immune. Now, here's the question. How many millipedes poison themselves before they develop the mitochondria that protects them? It would have taken hundreds of thousands of millions of years to develop something like that. That's sophisticated. So again, it's an example, and I'm going through these, I know, pretty quick. Slow me down if you want. This guy is amazing, and he's complicated. And he's so complicated that he's irreducibly complicated. You can't have him function without both the cyanide working properly and the resistance to the cyanide. The system that produces the cyanide is extremely complex and would have to evolve at the same time, otherwise none of it would have worked. These are just simple logical arguments that you can see. You just can't get the kind of sophisticated creatures that we have in this world without somebody designing them and making them. They can't come together by accident or a slow process of change, one step at a time. Okay, on to the next. Giraffes, tallest animal in the world, also has the largest heart. Anybody know why? Got to get that blood clear up to his head. That's a long way to go for blood. Okay, and that's what it says. Has the largest heart, which is needed to produce enough pressure to pump blood up to his brain. That makes sense, okay? But the brain is a very delicate structure which cannot stand high blood pressure. We've had some examples lately of people with high blood pressure that caused some problems with their brain and had some strokes. It's a sad situation. The kind of blood pressure that would exist in this condition with that giraffe who needs to drink just like you do, okay, would be so difficult. What happens when the giraffe bends down to take a drink? If not for two precision mechanisms, the same heart needed to pump that blood up to his brain while standing would literally blow his brains out when he got a drink. And he wouldn't survive it. Too much pressure. His brain would be injured. Okay, well, let's look at these couple of sophisticated things real quickly here, or not necessarily quickly, but in process. First, there's a series of one-way check valves. That blue thing you see there, those are the check valves along that jugular vein. Immediately, and they close, check valves in the jugular veins immediately close as the head is lowered, thus preventing blood from flowing back down into the brain. So the blood is caused to stop and slow down. Okay, then why doesn't he black out if that happens? We can see why it's needed. You got to keep that blood from just boom, and the brain just being injured so badly. Secondly, a spongy tissue called the wondernet, located near the base of the brain, absorbs any excess blood and controls the blood flow to the brain. So here's this little sponge that has blood in it from when it was standing up, and it supplies the brain with blood until he stands up again, which I don't know how long that has to be. Maybe he can't be down there for too long till that blood supply runs out. So if you notice here in this picture, that brown thing is his brain. Right behind it is that red thing. That's the wonder net. And it's kind of funny how they name some of these things. It's an amazing little organ here. Finally, when he stands back up again, the wonder net supplies just the right amount of blood to the brain until the proper blood pressure is restored. Those check valves have to open up again, and the brain flow gets back to what's normal for him while he's standing. All these mechanisms had to be in place for the giraffe to have a long neck and survive. Couldn't just wait for them. How many brains were blown out and creatures die until you had to have both of these systems involved. So an amazing, complicated, irreducible design that God had to make, that God made, and that evolution can't even begin to explain. Next one. I think this is one of Brother Downey's favorites examples, the Archerfish. Isn't he cute? I think he's cute. Well, unlike the bombardier beetle, who we talked about here last week, who uses his explosive weapon only for defense, just to ward creatures away, this fish fires precisely aimed jets of water at aerial prey up to 6 feet away, and then catches its dislodged victims on the water surface. And so here he is. And he can shoot that stream at bugs about 6 feet. And he rarely ever misses. That's what's amazing. Watch it. Go on YouTube. Just look up Archerfish and just see some of the videos. Sometimes it takes a couple times because they don't knock him off always, but then he blasts them again. There he goes. I mean, he's just amazing. It's just amazing to see how much God came up with when he made creatures. Now, just to begin with, how a creature would evolve this kind of behavior rather than just continue catching prey in the water like other fish has never been remotely explained to begin with. Why would somebody start shooting things? I mean, how would you even start thinking that up? That's hard for evolutionists to even come up with that idea alone. But even if he did just develop that, how could he ever learn to hit his target is beyond comprehension. I want to show a little video, if it will work, of this guy in action, and then we'll look at why it's so difficult to imagine how an archerfish who's underwater can hit something outside the water. And you don't have to be a scientist to figure it out. Okay, let's see if this little works here. The bug is right there. It's kind of hard to see. Oh, you can't even see on my, let me use the laser. Is there a laser on this?
Yeah.
Well,
You're kind of backwards.
Are you saying I'm backwards, man?
You're lasering yourself.
I am, and I survived because of my natural immunity. Okay, right there's the bug. Just a little bug on the end of that leaf. I'm gonna turn it around again. I don't know why. So, oh, that didn't work. Let's go back. I pushed the wrong thing. Let's try one more time.
The fact that the fish could see it through the water.
Think of the archerfish as a fastball pitcher, except that the distance to home plate changes with each batter. Plus, a baseball holds its shape, and the archerfish has to shoot a jet of water.
Okay, this guy's talking. You can go online and look at this video. He talks about a lot more things that we'll be talking about. But I'm going to just show it one more time if I can.
Think of the archerfish as a fastball pitcher, except that the distance to home plate changes with each batter. Plus, a baseball holds its shape, and the archerfish has to shoot a jet of water.
Okay, he's talking about the dynamics of shooting this stream of water, which I won't go into right here actually, which at different distances hits the prey at the same speed, and it's really amazing. Look at that up, and I'm not going to go into that. I just want to show what I think is even more amazing, that this guy can even hit the bug at all. And you have to remember something. This is what light does when it goes through different mediums. When light goes from water to air, it doesn't go straight. Visually, it goes, you see, like this pen isn't really broken. It just looks like it is, because that's what happens. Water refracts. And it goes between air and water, and the target is not where it appears to be. Do I write this down and learn this equation? No, you don't have to, but this is a description of how light is affected as it goes from air to water or water to air, either way. There's two laws that affect this: index of refraction and Snell's law. I never heard of it either. Well, actually I did. I took physics, so I know a little bit about this, but it's been a long time. The thing is, this is what happens. When light goes up from water to air or comes down again, depending on the angle you're looking out. If you're looking straight up, no problem. You start looking at an angle, it starts to bend at the surface of the water. The more of an angle, the more it bends. It's not even the same angle that it bends, depending, it's different. If you're looking like this, it bends so much. If you're looking like this, it bends, whoa. Okay? So, let me ask you, how many ever have done bow fishing before? Oh, come on, am I the only one that's ever done bow fishing? Did you have the fiberglass arrow on that thing, or did you use it? Yeah. Yeah, I took my bow, I bought a little kit that has a fiberglass arrow, because a wood arrow is not going to go anywhere in water, and a little reel, so you can wrap the string around, attach it to the arrow, and whew, how many times I could miss that thing until I realized you got to aim not where the fish appears to be, you've got to aim below it quite a bit, because that air is bending. I mean, the air's not bending, the light's bending. It's just a simple physical law. The question is, the ability for the fish to calculate its target's displaced position could only be a design feature. You can't wait around. I mean, how many 100,000 years would it have taken to evolve? But until then, the behavior would be useless. That fish is just going, oh man, I'm getting closer. Oh, yeah, it looks like it's there. This is a complicated mathematical problem that has to be designed into that brain for it to work. So this Archerfish, evolution can't explain how it developed the feature to begin with and how it can actually use it properly in any situation. And we won't even talk about how it calculates the gravity effect on the stream, all these kinds of things that we know and we work with, but okay. The Archerfish's aiming and shooting mechanisms could not have evolved because they are irreducibly complex. You've got to have one to have the other, and for this to work properly, and get all the mosquitoes you can, Mr. Archerfish, because we don't like those particular bugs, then it's evidence for creation, not evolution. Okay, moving on to two of my favorites, actually, as far as creatures of design. We're going to look at the sea anemone, and in conjunction with it, we're going to look at the nudibranch sea slug. Wonderful, huh? You'll see in just a second how wonderful nudibranch sea slugs really are. But first, look at the sea anemone. Have you ever been snorkeling? You've maybe seen these. There are lots of them in Puget Sound, actually, too, that you just float their little tentacles around, look so pretty, just attracts all sorts of different living creatures to them. Beautiful underwater animals that catch their prey in stinging tentacles. The end of each and every one of the sea anemone's tentacles is a small capsule. Looks not exactly like this mechanical illustration, but is similar to it. Inside this capsule is a poisonous dart attached to a sac of poison. Near the bottom of the dart is a spring system. Okay, this biological spring system, but still is. At the top of the capsule is a trap door, complete with a little trigger. It's a little piece of tissue on the end that forms, that is a trigger. When a fish gets too close to the sea anemone's tentacles and brushes the trigger, the trap door flies open and the poison dart shoots out and the fish is injected with poison. The spring that launched the dart holds on like a line until the poison takes effect. And then the fish is caught. Now don't look too sad. I mean, anybody here eat fish? Come on. Okay, so hunting mechanism that this particular animal uses. After the prey is paralyzed in pieces, If you evolve that spring little mechanism first, there's no dart. You know, there's no poison, there's no trap door. Now, put your finger there for a nudibranch. See, there are all sorts of them, and there's one that just looks like I don't know what that looks like. Just a certain variety of nudibranch sea slug that loves to eat, guess what? Sea anemones. One of their main diet is sea anemones. Now, you right off the bat are thinking, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem there. How do you get past all that poison dart? Well, not only is the sea slug not stung by the sea anemones, but it actually swallows a sea anemone whole, poison darts and all. Starting to gobble that guy up. This isn't a lab setting, but still it's real. Starts to swallow up this sea anemone. The poison does not affect the sea slug, and the poison darts do not open up or fire. They just stay closed. The sea anemone is eaten and goes into the stomach of the sea slug where it is digested, all except the poison darts. They're not digested. They stay in the belly of the sea slug undigested. Now here's the trick. There are tiny tubes lined with moving cilia, hairs, which link the stomach to the waving spurs on the sea slug's back. The sea anemone's stinging cells, so fatal to other organisms, are transported along these tubes by the cilia from the stomach up those tiny tubes to the tips of the spurs on the sea slug. And there the sea slug stores the stolen weapons to use in its own defense, shooting them at anything which dares to attack it. What? That's just amazing. I mean, how would that come about? How could that possibly evolve? How many steps in that system of eating, being resistant to the poison, the slug, digesting the slug but not the darts, having those tubes in place somehow, some million years later you develop these tubes that go up your whatever you call those things, those spines, and then the mechanism that would pull it up into there until you can also have poisonous darts. I mean, that is so cool. I just love it. I mean, beyond cool, of course, it's amazing example of God creating something very, very complicated system.
Biological arms race.
A biological arms race, okay. So, the nudibranch, and along with the sea anemone, every part of the sea slug's complex mechanism had to be complete right from the beginning to ensure its survival. I don't see how you could explain it any other way. It was designed by God. It was imagined by God and designed by God and made by God. Sam, over here. You're over here with Andrew first. I don't know who had to stand up first. Andrew.
But what a complex ecosystem too, right? I mean, what would happen if the sea slug here wasn't there? Wouldn't the anemones wouldn't really have a predator? They would just keep growing, and soon the ocean floor would be covered with anemones.
Yeah.
But now, God not only created a creature that could defend itself, it created a creature that could devour the other creature.
That's right.
What an incredibly complex ecosystem.
Incredible. Now, the nudibranch is not the only little creature that's immune. There are a few others. Who's ever watched what? Clownfish. They're immune. They don't devour the sea anemone, but if you've ever seen, what's the movie? Finding Nemo, which if you're a parent, have little kids, you've probably seen it a few hundred times. But yeah, they can swim in and out, and it doesn't set off. They also have a system that doesn't allow that causes the anemone not to fire those little darts. But yeah, this is, to me, I mean, I haven't found anything that's cooler than this. If you've got an example of complex biological function, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you send it my way. I'd be glad to see it. Bill sent me something on electric eels. I'm not going to use that this time around, but it's an amazing example of complicated electrical technology in a creature. Okay, Sam.
I've watched different shows that would be considered evolution design back, but they don't really mention evolution very much. they mentioned creature powers. And if you go to any animal, pretty much, and they would do it. They go to any animal and they say, look at this amazing ability or abilities that it has, right? And in that, you have an irreducibly complex designed thing, and almost everything is designed like that if you really go into nature. But then you have this, which it happens somewhat, not so often, but it happens to a couple of different species, is where two different very complicated species have a design that functions together. So there's one thing to say evolution can't design one irreducibly complex or two different ones, but also two different ones that actually have a symbiotic relationship.
Right.
And there's a lot of animals that their abilities are amazing, but only if they have these other creatures around them. Their abilities are in relationship to these other creatures that are around them. And so this one is just a major example of how did they evolve individually, and how did they would have to evolve together. How does evolution say, I need a buddy to use my system?
Yeah. Amen. Right on. Marilyn.
I'm curious how evolution explains if they can't eat, if they can't protect themselves, and they can't drink, wouldn't they be extinct? And how did they explain them not the giraffe, the bomber beetle, and the archerfish not being extinct?
Yeah, they have their stories. They don't know. They actually say these are difficult things to explain, but we all know it came about by evolution. That's what they do, is they will not accept a natural system. So no, there's no good explanations.
So I just have one thing to add. With Psalm 104:24, and at the last it says, the earth is full of your possessions.
Yeah.
Is it that they don't want to accept that this is God's territory, God's earth?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I think that is why, even beyond reason, so many evolutionists make a conclusion that there is that this all happened by chance, because the ulterior possibility or answer is God. And many, and I don't know who they are exactly. They don't want to. We read a bunch of quotes in the beginning about evolutionists who say we've got motives here. We don't want to have to be accountable to an all-powerful God, and so we come up with a system we think might work, which of course it doesn't at all. Mike. Oh, sorry, Nate, back there.
In the example of the archerfish, my curiosity is, if it evolved, and if that was an example of a animal that evolved to make hunting its prey, an insect, viable, why did it stop at just the one fish? Why didn't evolution give that ability to other fish who prey on insects, and see that ability was a strong ability to have to multiple fish? Why did it just stop at the one?
That's a good question. Why don't we have that ability? Wouldn't that be great? Shoot a stream of water or something like, 100 yards and knock that guy out. Well, got that. Well, I'm being a little silly, but yeah, good question. Mike, did you have a point?
Yeah, I was just going back to that sea anemone. If you look at each part of that mechanism that it has, with the trap door, the poison dart, and the spring, that is just so similar to your illustration of the mousetrap, which is so commonly used. If you didn't have the trap door with a little catch on it, then everybody would see the dart, and it would never be useful. But that has to be there in order for the prey to get close enough to it. And then if you didn't have the spring that was holding the dart, it would poison the fish, but then they would fall away, and it would not be drawn back into the anemone.
Right. That's right.
So every, it's of course futile to try to imagine how all those things came about separately and in a process of things. That they have no effectiveness apart from all working together as a cohesive system with a very definite purpose of catching prey.
Catching prey.
And
this has a definite purpose, this little mousetrap, of catching prey.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add one more thing. You know, that word purpose, if you look at it, not only within an organism or an animal or plant do these systems have purpose, but then you back away and you see within an ecosystem that they fill in a necessary function within an ecosystem. And that comprehends a purpose that is beyond any of the individual plants or animals within that system.
Yep.
And that it comprehends a system, a purpose that could only have been implemented by a superior intelligence or an intelligent designer who we know as God.
Amen. You know, do yourself a favor. Don't grab the mousetrap off your shelf that you've used a few times. Go to a store, buy a new mousetrap, and play with it for a few days. I mean, you're going to snap your fingers a few times. I got that. You always do. But just look at that thing and just see. Now, you know, this really does illustrate, one way anyway, complicated creatures that God has made. This mousetrap is useless without any of its parts. Take away one of them, it's no good. That's the case with these creatures. You take away one of these things that evolution would have to take so long to evolve, and it's no good. It doesn't work. So it can't be the answer. Evolution can't be the answer. Sam.
As we see these different amazing abilities and equipment and weapons that these different species have, and they're many and diverse, society and scientists and even us, we're amazed. It's like, ooh, that animal has a bazooka. Oh, that animal has a spear, underwater spear fishing system that works great. That's so clever and so amazing that it's wonderful, right? It's a creature power, right? And the Bible, that makes a lot more sense in Romans, where God's like, it should be evident that this is so special that someone had to make it.
Clearly see that.
And there's a huge wide scientific field and engineering field and manufacturing field that they spend all their time studying animals to try to reproduce their systems. They get these shells from the beach, and they're like, if we could reproduce its shell, we can have a kind of structure that we can build anything, because it's going to be 100 times stronger than what we can build right now.
Yeah.
And they're trying to reproduce these systems because they're so amazing.
So intricate mechanisms, you use the word equipment, sophisticated, just amazing, yeah.
And there's a lot of people in the world, you watch Amazing Grace, if it's 100% accurate, the politician that he was somewhat a Christian but didn't have much faith, but then he started looking at leaves and stuff. And in the world, God expects us to look at these things and go, someone made this that's amazing and powerful. We're supposed to come to that conclusion. It should be evident.
Yeah, Nate?
Just thinking, the first thing that comes to mind when you said what you just said there, Sam, is flight. What did man have to design to recreate what's in animals?
Yeah.
Flight.
Yep. Amazing engineering step that would be. You know, if Darwin was alive today, instead of back in the 1830s and 40s, I wonder if he'd be an evolutionist or not. I really do. Here's a quote that he said back in 1840 or so. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not have been formed by successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Well, we broke it down so many times just in the last little part of an hour. He admitted that. So I'm wondering today, if he were around, if he would say, look, guys, come on, I know I put this out here and all you guys jumped on the bandwagon and have made your changes, but look, these creatures, they could never have gone through this step-by-step process. I don't know. Maybe he would have. Okay, moving on here, which we're no hurry, so whatever comments you want to make. We're going to go through these last ones kind of quickly. You can look into them. Bat sonar, what an amazing design feature that is 1,000,000 times more sensitive than the radars and sonars built by man. It's that amazing. Detects its own signals even if they are 2,000 times fainter than background noises. Can see a fruit fly up to 100 feet away by echolocation and catch 4 or 5 in a second. Sophisticated, technologically amazing feature that a bat has. It's irreducibly complex. It had to have the transmitter and the receiver and all the math involved in figuring these things out to start with, or forget about catching flies or anything else for that matter. Monarch butterfly, you've all heard of this guy. Navigates 3,000 miles every year from Nova Scotia to the mountains of Mexico City. His navigation equipment is packed into a brain the size of a pinhead. Try to do that. And we reduced our electronics pretty far, but to have all this equipment in the size of a pinhead. The level of technology required is no less than sophisticated than man-made electronic equipment. To do this deal, to navigate that distance, the same time, same place every year, no matter the weather, it does it. It's irreducibly complex. It's amazingly designed. Venus flytrap. Well, we love this guy. And if you don't like bugs, you really love this guy. Gives off an irresistible scent that attracts its prey. That's number one. Got to have that scent. When the fly touches the hairs over the petals, an electrical impulse signals the motor cells to snap the petals closed. You got to have that sensor. You got to have that muscle. You got to have that system. The plant starts to secrete a flesh-dissolving liquid that turns the fly into jelly, which can then be absorbed to the petals. All that is necessary. Couldn't happen on a step-by-step process of let's evolve this thing over millions of years, one little part at a time. No, it's just like that mousetrap, useless without all the features. Dolphins' speed. Dolphins are fast, much faster than people thought were possible. It was considered theoretically impossible for the dolphin to attain 25 miles per hour top speed, as the energy required was 10 times more the muscle material that this animal had. You had to be 10 times as strong to go that fast, until they discovered that a complex pillar diaphragm skin system that constantly sloughs off is replaced every 2 hours and reduces its drag by 60%. Believe me, this guy's been studied a lot for efficient water transport system. Yeah, Mike.
When my family owned a cabin in Montana, we spend hours watching bats chase moths. But here's the amazing thing. These moths could fly almost as fast as a bird. Only at night we could see them in the bright lights we had. So the bats would send out this radar. If the moths strayed very far from the telephone pole where the light was, the bats would go after it. Now these moths were extremely fast, and they could hear the bat's sonar because they had antennae that looked like feathers.
Yeah,
and so I'd watch them, and the moth would do a loop, and the bat would do a loop. Moth would do another loop, the bat would do another loop. Yeah. If the bat didn't catch the moth by the third loop, the bat gave up and went around the barn for about 45 seconds and came back. So it was incredible what the bat did, but just as incredible as the moth. And here's the question. If all this is not by design but by accident, then how did these bats develop the sonar in time to survive as a species? Because how did the moths survive? Because the bats are so incredibly fast and accurate, but it couldn't have happened by chance.
Yeah, great example of something, a symbiotic almost relationship there. Do we have another hand up, Nate? No. Oh, we did. Oh, Sam, did you have your hand up?
I was gonna try
No,
to
you
get,
did, you
I
did or
was
you
gonna
didn't?
try to get you to mention about the monarch butterfly.
Oh.
Monarch butterfly is one of the mysteries of science that I would say points towards God kind of having his hand in the system. Is not only do they use their navigation system to go where they go, but when they get back to like America, they go through 8 generations before the 8th generation has to make the trip.
I didn't know that.
They don't pass it on by saying, hey, this is the route that you want to take. No, they live, die, and through the each generation has to use the navigation system to go where they haven't been told to go.
Wow.
What is this?
I'll include that next time in my side, in my series here. Thank you.
No, it's great-great-great-great-grandfather that knew how to do the trip.
How did it know? God told it and taught it. Flight of the Golden Plover. We're going to skip that one. It's cool. You can look them up. Going to switch gears here. We're going to go from wonderful creatures of design. Amazing that you could spend months and months and years and looking at all the different things that God has made, and they're sophisticated beyond imagination and so complex that they couldn't come about by chance. So we've looked at some of those. You could look at a lot more. Well, we're going to switch some gears, and we're going to look at something that's not been possible to look at for the last, 2021? 70, 80 years anyway, I think, maybe 100. And that is some of the amazing technology that you can't see with the naked eye. Now you can see some of these things that we've been looking at. Life is amazingly complex in a way that we can't easily see with our naked eye. We've been looking at those things. Creatures that are amazing. The system of our body, the ear, the eye, these different guys here, the bombardier beetle and the giraffe, the fish we looked at all these. Amazingly complex. And we can see that without a lot of assistance to our vision. Amazingly complex. But let me tell you, life becomes ridiculously complex in a way that we cannot see with the naked eye. And that's what we're going to look at starting next week. So come back and let's look at some of these things. With the technology, and I'm going to say here just for a second, that I wonder because evolution now is more popular than ever, I wonder if God allows these kinds of technologies in time to open up to where we can see things that earlier people could never even begin to see. We can see some design and function and order that is so complex at the very small microscopic level. Machines that function continually in your body that make things work. It's just amazing. So next week, we'll take up with that.